topic this afternoon is about building the foundation for world-class enterprise technology operation. Just to say a couple things about me, as Kyler already said, yeah, I've got 30 years of chemical industry experience, and that time was mostly in the manufacturing space. I'd say it was about split kind of 50-50 between mainstream manufacturing type assignments, and then got into ERP. So I've got over 20 years of ERP implementation and operation experience. And most of my experience, I've always been on the receiving end. I've always been on the business side of things, and helping to having to start up, implementations and actually live with them after we start up. So that's a little bit different than just implementing. When you actually have to live with it, you kind of have a different perspective there. The other thing is after that time in the chemical industry, I also have done about 5 years of continuous improvement consulting. And I think you're going to see that some of what we talk about today, we kind of tie the two together, that you can use some continuous improvement methodology in doing your ERP implementation and learning how to operate it appropriately. Kind of the things I want to walk through, talk a little bit about the cold hard truth about digital transformations. Some of this you've already heard because Eric has already talked about some of that. But I'm going to get into some of the common challenges and misperceptions and then talk about how to overcome that. Then I'm going to introduce probably a new term to most of you called foundational support processes. That's not one you're going to find in literature, but I'll explain a little bit more about that once we get into it. And then I'll actually kind of break down the impact of starting early and then kind of summarize. So the cold hard truth about digital transformations, you already know this, over half of them experience some sort of operational disruption. That's a big number. If you think about that, when you think, folks have been implementing ERP systems for like 30 years now. And I cannot think of any other implementation where it's a coin toss whether this thing's going to be successful or not. It's kind of crazy when you think about it. And if you're one of the unlucky ones, and it's only one of two, so half of you in the room, hopefully not half of you in the room, but half of you in the world are going to experience a negative experience with that. And if it does happen, it's going to cost you some money. It's going to be somewhere between 50% and 300% of the initial cost that you had estimated. So, and I know these numbers are from the research that we've done at third stage, but I've looked at Gartner research too, and it's quite similar. So it's the real deal. There really is a struggle with implementing ERP systems. Now, some of the challenges. Now we've talked about this a little bit before. I think there's two big ones. These are two that often make everybody's top 10 list, and quite often they're in the top 5 all the time. You see it very consistently. Inadequate organizational change management and poor master data. So kind of back to what I said earlier, if we've been doing this for 30 years, why is it so hard to get this right? And when I think about why that is such a problem today, we've been doing this stuff for 30 years. Why is it so hard to get it right? I think ultimately it comes down to the fact that these are not things that the organization can just turn over to somebody else to do. They can hire a system integrator. The system integrator can bring some great tools and they can help them. But ultimately, that the implementing organization has got to deliver on these things. And we're not the experts. They are not the implementation experts. So you might have a system integrator who's done a half a dozen or a dozen or 2 dozen implementations, and they're getting smarter, they're getting better. But for most of us that actually are implementing, it happens, we do it once. This is the only time we may ever do it. And so you're seeing that again and again and again, where we've got these things. It's the implementing organization that's got to deliver, and it's hard. So that's part of why it's a coin flip. Now, as far as some common misperceptions, one of the big ones is I'm going to call Mr. System Integrator, and they're going to come in and they're going to solve all my problems. And what that does, that has a negative effect. It makes an organization wait. They just decide, all right, we're going to wait till we get the system integrator. We're not going to start now. We don't exactly know what to do, so we're just going to pause and wait. And when that's done, when you do that, then you lose time and money. You lose time because that that period of time that you're sitting there waiting, doing nothing, that time is gone forever. And you know, I talk to people 6 months into an implementation. You talk to anyone who's going through it, and they'll tell you. I mean, if you ask them, they all say, "I wish I had done this earlier. I wish I had worked on my data. I wish I had worked on my inventory, because I don't have time to do it now." That's the problem. So that time is lost and gone forever. The loss of money. I think what happens is when you don't do the things that you can and should do before bringing in a system integrator, then when they get on the ground, you find yourself scrambling trying to get those things done now. And when they're on the ground, the meter's running, and the meter runs fast with these system integrators. So, you know, you find, I liken it to, well, back in the old day when we actually used to use taxis, I liken it to calling a taxi and you know, trying to get a ride to the airport, and they're sitting in the driveway while you're feeding the kids and making the lunches and cleaning the dishes. It's you're wasting that money. So you really want to do these things, and you want to do them as early as you can, and really try to nail them down. So the other common misperception is that cloud solutions make ERP implementations easier. And I know Eric touched this a little bit earlier. And what this does is it causes organizations to get this false sense that this is going to be an easy ride somehow, and that you start to compress timelines, and you get these unrealistic timelines. Now, I look at this and say, it doesn't make any sense if implementing. So from a cloud standpoint, it's easier to stand up the software. I'll grant you that. So if the rate limiting step was standing up the software, then it would make perfect sense that cloud implementations would be getting faster. But the reality is that's not the rate limiting step. What really happens is now you've got the cloud solutions tend to be a little more vanilla, a little more standardized. And what that means, the likelihood is that for you to implement on a cloud solution, you're going to have to adapt more. So if you've got yourself talked into this unrealistic timeline, then now you've got more change that's going to happen in less time. And it doesn't take a genius to figure out that's a recipe. That's not a good recipe. This is not going to end well. So that's a real problem there. All right. So if we talk about the components of traditional organizational change management, there's a lot of folks out there that have their own methodology, and they may use the terms a little bit differently, and they may call them something else. But for the most part, these are the things you see here are the main components of most organizational change management things. And you kind of look at them and say, yeah, they're all important. They're all necessary. So why is it that I still struggle with this stuff? So if you go to the next slide, and I think one of the big problems is that if you take a look at the traditional approach, it is very project focused, and I mean that's intentional because it is a project. But if you go ahead and build it out a little bit, it's focused almost exclusively. Stop right there. There you go. So it's really focused exclusively on all the wonderful things that you're going to do after go live. There's really no effort made to implement any kind of changes before go live. So this idea that you're not going to demonstrate any tangible capabilities, that whether you can actually do something, you won't do anything for real until go live, and that creates this bit of a leap of faith event, and that's part of why it's so difficult, I think. All right, so really, to achieve world class, it takes a different approach. It does take an operational focus. And when I talk about that, go ahead and build it out. I think it's important to demonstrate certain capability actually before go live. And there's a lot of things you can do, not just before go live, but really before even engaging a system integrator. And a lot of those things is what I call these foundational support processes. And these are things that the system integrator doesn't actually teach. This is not where they play. They're very project focused, and they're trying to do all they can do in the project, but they don't deal with this part of it, and that's a big part. So go ahead, Kyler. All right, so we talk about foundational support processes, and I mentioned before that this is not a term you're going to find out there and widely used in industry, but for me, what that means, these are processes that are designed to help ensure that your system is and remains an accurate depiction of the physical reality. I've said it many, many times to folks that one of the key principles in operating an ERP system is if your system is an accurate reflection of the physical world.
The whole idea here is that what happens in reality and what's happening in your warehouse with your inventory, even with your financial situation, your human capital situation, when you look at inventory cycle and just general movements of data and information, there tends to be a disconnect between what's happening in the physical world and what is necessarily being tracked in the system. So I think that's the key point here on this, is just making sure you've got that alignment and that you have processes that are ensuring that those processes and data points are remaining aligned.
Can you hear me again?
Absolutely.
Yep.
Yep.
I don't know what to tell you, folks. Anyway, so the other good thing about this stuff, not only can you do it in advance, but you can use that to your advantage. You can actually use this as an indication of when you're really ready to start your implementation. I think that's one question a lot of folks know. When is the right time? How do I know I'm ready? Once you get into a project, it's easy to measure readiness, but the notion, how do I measure when it's time to start my project? That can be harder. When you start implementing things like this, these foundational support processes, now you've got a way to measure. If you're implementing cycle counting, if you're doing cycle counting and you know your inventory record accuracy is greater than 95 or 97%, you're in a pretty good place. You're getting there. You may not be exactly where you want to be for go live, but you're in the zone. If you're below 95, you're in trouble. And if you're sitting there thinking, what is cycle counting? Then you're in real trouble. So I mean, you've got some things to do there. All right, so this is an example. I'm gonna have to step you through this one push at a time. So what I'm showing here is, if you take a look at, we talked about inventory. I'll talk a little bit more about inventory. In a traditional project, what you're trying to do, the system integrator is going to take whatever inventory you have in whatever state it's in and try to migrate you to a system. Now, if you want to get to world class, you've got to have, it's not just getting into a system, you've got to have some other processes in place, these foundational support processes. I've got to be able to measure and report my inventory record accuracy. I've got to be able to conduct cycle counts and look at my inventory age. All of these things are things I've got to have to get world class. Now, in a traditional approach, go ahead and click it once. That what you find out often, there's no real process changes that'll happen before I go live. Typically, inventory might be cleaned up in a one-off event, like doing a plant physical kind of thing. So that's akin to kind of trying to inspect quality in. It's not sustainable. Then when you go live, one more click. When you go live, what happens is now, for some reason, folks think I'm going to get religion. I'm going to suddenly start doing cycle counting. I'm going to work on my inventory accuracy because now it's all in the system. I can do it. I can see it. But what it really happens is you end up having to do a lot of process changes at go live. So go ahead again. And what you find out is you have a lot of changes to do even after go live. And if you've had a rough go live, if you had a hard time with this, a lot of times you do not get to the finish line. You don't finish the last couple of things. You sort of struggle. You kind of get to the point you're like, I just want to get stable. I'm okay. I want to just get to the new system. Forget all that world class stuff. I just want to get to where I can sleep at night again, and that's a bumpy place. But if you compare that to going the other route. So if you first build the organizational capability by implementing these foundational processes before go live, now you've got, look how much you've done. You've got this ahead of you. Now when you go live, go ahead. When you actually go live, you don't have to do this inventory cleanup. You've already ensured that the inventory is good. You've done it by process. And now when I'm going live, I don't have all these changes to worry about. I'm really getting close to just doing it's not a technical migration, but it's more of, I just need to learn how to do these things in my new system. I'm already doing them. I'm pretty good at it. I just need to learn how to do it in the new system. And that means that the change that has to take place at go live is that much less. And so now you're already kind of easing into that continuous improvement phase at the end of go live there. So when you look at both of these things together, you notice a couple of things. One, that the first way where you've had that intense project focus, that go live event, it came earlier. That's true, but it was much bigger. It was a much bigger event. There's a
Yeah, I think a lot of what, just to add some commentary, not necessarily where he was going to go with this point here, but one of the key things here is, these are things that could be done whether you're in the midst of a transformation, if you've already gone through a transformation, or if you're just working off whatever older systems you have. There's a lot to be said for this whole framework and this whole process of looking at that future state. There's a lot of optimization and benefits that can happen just from whatever technologies you have, just from fine tuning some of these things that Dave's talking about here. It looks like you're back, Dave. Yep. We were thinking maybe if you turn off your camera and do audio only, that might help. Just take up less bandwidth.
Okay, hopefully it does. Yes. All right. So yeah. So I don't know where it cut out, but the point the point of this slide was to let you know that if you go the traditional project approach, the ERP go live is a lot bigger event. There's a lot more going on. Whereas if you were able to actually go with the operational approach and have that focus there, you can actually lay the groundwork. You can lay the foundation well in advance. Your go live event is a much smaller event. It happens a little bit later, but it actually is a much smoother landing spot. Go ahead, Kyler, again. And so even though the project focus does get you to a go live faster, the operational focus gets you to world class faster. That is the way to get to world class, and that's the fastest way I knew to get there. All right, data. It might surprise you that I talk about two types of data. I know there's hundreds of data elements out there, right? But I still simplify it and categorize them into two types. So the first type is what I call the set it and forget it type, and the other one is the monitor and adjust type. The set it and forget it. So these are kind of fairly static things. These are things, it's not that they don't change at all, but they're driven more by the administrative or kind of structural changes. It may be like material descriptions and addresses and organizational elements, things like that. Things that an address doesn't change until somebody physically moves, and it happens. It happens all the time, but for any given customer or vendor or something like it, it happens every few years, right? So it doesn't happen that much. Whereas the monitor and adjust, go ahead and click it. These are somewhat variable. Now, this is more driven by continuous improvement activities. So you look at bombs and routes and lead times and things like that. So if I'm making bicycles, then my bombs probably don't change much. But if I'm a chemical manufacturer and yield is very important, I've probably got programs driving my yield, and my bombs need to reflect what my yield really is, not the theoretical capability of what the chemist said it should be, but what we actually do. With routes, folks, one of the key components in routes, of course, is rates. And people are always trying to drive rate improvement. So you need to have that rate needs to be reflected. Your actual capability needs to be reflected in there. So you have to have processes in place to look at these things and analyze them and make adjustments so that you're constantly trying to keep the system aligned with the physical reality. And so that's more of these foundational support processes. All right, so now, but if you look at this stuff, now the system integrators, they actually treat all of the data like it's the set it and forget it type. You don't believe me? They ask you to fill out a template, right? They tell me what data you want to be in the system at go live. They don't talk about what are you going to do a year from now. They don't talk about how do you do this kind of analysis and maybe even root cause analysis and trying to understand the various components and go through all that stuff. They just say, fill out this template. Tell me what I need to put in the system. But if you want to get to world class, if you really want to be good, you've got to get good at this monitor and adjust type of data. And so you've got to have processes, and these are more like Six Sigma type processes where you're trying to do the analysis and figure out what the, if I wanted to do something with lead times, for example. It's funny because I've heard people say, well, just if I want a 30-day lead time, I just put in a 30-day lead time. I said, no, lead time needs to reflect your capability. So you have to do the analysis of the various components of that cycle time, and then work on those and get them down. So when you demonstrate that you can do 30 days, then you adjust the data to follow. So these are all some of these foundational support.
Yeah. So on this slide, what I've heard him talk about before is just looking at different processes and your level of readiness for those different processes. So not all of your business processes and functions and capabilities within the organization are going to be at equal stages of readiness. So it's a matter of understanding where are we now for each of these different processes and where should we be by this point in the process.
Yeah.
So
I'm back if you can hear me.
We can hear.
Oh, goodness. All right. So really the point of this, what I'm showing, I'm showing a dozen or so processes here. You probably have a dozen processes that you're going to be implementing at go live. Some of these things have components that you can do well in advance. And my suggestion is do as many in advance as you can, because it really reduces what you have to do at go live. So if you click it once, so as you start to work on these things and you start to pull these forward, pull it to the left of the pre-go live activities, then you start to see my readiness for go live goes up. And go ahead again. And then the more you do, the better it goes. And go ahead again. So really, by starting these business process work earlier, what it does is it first of all, your team gets a lot smarter. They understand a lot more about what's coming their way because they're working on these things now. So they make better project decisions. The other thing that happens is you've done all the things you can and should do before starting an ERP implementation. Now you can make the most efficient use of your expensive solution provider resources or the system integrator resources. That's critical. You have a lot less changes to deal with at go live, which mitigates the risk, and basically the whole thing just tips the scale towards success. All right, so really, in summary, the key to achieving the world-class ERP operational capability. So obviously, it has to have that operational focus. You need to establish these foundational support processes. And again, a reminder, these are things that the system integrators don't teach you how to do. The beginning early, that is certainly part of we just talked about that, what that means for all of those reasons. That's why it's very important to start early. It really sets you up for success. And one final point, I think there's one more click, is that obviously since system integrators don't teach you these things, I got to put at least one little commercial in there. We're certainly very happy to try to help guide you through that process. So I totally apologize for the technical difficulties, but anyway, I hope that's been helpful.